Are student athletes considered employees?
I think what we consider an amateur athlete is changing.
These student athletes are giving these schools millions and millions and millions of dollars. Are student athletes considered employees? Well, according to a new decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals, they can be. Johnson v. NCAA determined that college athletes can be considered employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act and state laws. This decision flips on its head the precedent that student athletes can't be employees and athletes at the same time. This could have major implications and consequences on college athletics in America.
Welcome to Chalk Talk. I'm Dave.
And I'm Josh.
We're breaking down college sports, our favorite team, Stony Brook, and the latest news affecting sports fans and the business of sports.
Let's begin.
Josh, this decision really has implications for what we're thinking about as student athletes. Student athletes now are considered employees.
This is really unprecedented waters because in the past, student athletes did work for many, many hours a week, but they were always considered student athletes, and the reward for student athletes was always an education. There was never any talk about paying athletes, doing name, image, and likeness deals, or even directly paying athletes from colleges. So this is really
what we consider an
interesting.
amateur athlete now is completely changing, because amateur athletes were those ones who were playing in college sports that weren't getting paid. But now with the Supreme Court decision, Alston, that set up name and likeness, and now this decision, we need to start seeing amateur athletes are paid. They're no longer just athletes. They get paid for what they do. Because I was saying to you the other day, we know this athlete that gets up at 8 in the morning and he can go to class till 11 a.m. At 11:30 he has to be in the locker room. From 11:30 to 5:30 at night, he's practicing his sport. He does that 6 days a week. So if you think about that, that's what? 6 hours a week, 6 days a week? That's 36 hours a week. How many hours a week do you work full time?
I work about 37 and a half hours a week. How many hours do you work a week?
I work 37 and a half hours a week. If he's working 36, is he considered a full-time employee now, not a part-time? But he's not compensated. If we're trying to really change it, and this decision is saying that, we're going to see college athletes now compensated. And I think they should be.
Well, I think they should be too. I think we're going to see some mix of some name, image, and likeness. We're going to see some athletes being directly paid through their colleges. And I think we're going to see athletes get other benefits as well, because they now can be determined as FLSA employees. They could be
Fair Labor Standards Act. That's what you mean.
Yes. They could be owed minimum wage for their labor. They could be eligible for overtime pay. This could lead to the NCAA and universities paying for players who were student athletes, and they might have to pay for unpaid wages.
But I think it's really, the point of the whole thing is now we have to look at it as student athletes are paid employees. And who are the bosses of those student athletes? We have to look at coaches now as coaches changing. Coaches now may be a boss, and they may be that one who's not only motivating them to be successful, but how to do it. Where does this stand and how does it go? Could it mean that college athletes get paid, but they get paid more because they win rather than they lose? Because what's sports about? At the college level, it's about wins, and it's getting the wins you need. How is that affected?
How I see it is we're going to start seeing, in essence, free agent deals. You might see, at Stony Brook, for example, you could see, I'll name any player who just recently joined, Joe Octave.
Yeah.
He could, be offered, a free agent contract of, 1 year, $500,000 for going to Stony Brook. And we will all know how much money he's getting paid. We will know the terms of the deal, if he gets incentives for winning, if he gets penalties for losing, if he gets bonuses for being like all CAA, leading the team to the NCAA. Like, it's kind of like these college athletes are actually just pros.
Right. But I don't think they're pros. I think what we consider an amateur athlete is changing. An amateur athlete may not get the same deal we're talking. Yes, name and likeness has really changed the basketball side, that now they're getting paid $500,000 or more. I don't know if that's going to affect all athletes, because I think some will. If you're on the track and field team, you may get paid a minimum wage now. And that's unfair, because you should be paid the same amount, but where the money's coming from is different. I do think everybody needs to get paid a minimum salary. And I think that's what this decision is starting to gear us to, is that when we're starting to think about it, Johnson versus the NCAA, which NCAA lost, actually stated that there is no precedent for not paying them. So if we have the ability of paying our employees like student workers, think of them as student workers now. Student workers actually get paid for doing a job at the university. Why can't athletes do the same? They're doing a job and the university's benefiting.
And they're also bringing value to the university. Just like if you're in the NBA and you are playing for a team, if you're working for the state and you're providing value to them, if you are helping with YouTube videos, you are providing value to your employers. But for some reason, student athletes just never got to see any money back for the value they were providing for their college. The only thing they got was education, which I think is amazing. Don't get me wrong.
Well, the value of these educations is amazing. They leave without any student loan at all. How many people we know have to go through student loan forgiveness or are still paying thousands of dollars 10 years later? So there is value there that they're getting. Now that's just changing, that besides their scholarship, they're going to be able to get other money.
I think it's amazing, but I want to be honest here and say the value of an education is nowhere near the value these students are providing to college. Even the most expensive tuitions would maybe cost you $200,000, $300,000, but these student athletes are giving these schools millions and millions and millions of dollars. $200,000 for an education seems like a drop in the bucket for the millions and millions of dollars that these universities rake in, and these athletes don't see any of that money at all until these most recent rulings.
And I disagree a little bit, because the value of an education that way is worth every penny, and these schools are giving them fantastic educations. And I can't say enough the value of the education that I've gotten, and I am so blessed that I was able to do that. And I think we need to not undersell that. That value of education is really vital. And yes, you didn't have to pay to do that because you went to school and you benefited. So I don't think they should be paid millions of dollars. And I disagree with you there. They should be paid a reasonable percentage, but they're actually getting money by getting a free education. They're getting scholarships. How many students get that? When you're going to a Rutgers or when you're going to a Notre Dame, you're paying for that education. And that's a great education you're getting. And so many students are. These athletes are fortunate that they don't have to from scholarships, and they should get some money to spend, to have some spending money. I know an athlete who was in athletics. She was a basketball player, and not only that, she had a part-time job, and she needed the part-time job for spending money. I think that's where we need to start thinking about it, not writing a $1 million check to each employee or each player. I think it needs to be reasonable because they are getting paid already with having a free education.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit on your sentiment, because if I'm going to Rutgers, other than just going to class, maybe participating in a club, what value, other than my money that I'm giving to Rutgers, am I actually accruing for Rutgers? I'm giving them almost zero value except the money that I'm paying them for tuition. But if I'm a student athlete, I am creating much more value. I'm creating money because people are coming to see my games. I am creating value because there are sponsors who will want to advertise at games because I am playing in them. There will be people who buy concessions because I am attracting them to games. There will be more season tickets. There will be luxury boxes that are filled because I am playing. And that is so much value. That is so much money to these schools. And for a while, these schools just kept all that money. And they made lots and lots and lots of money.
They made millions. I agree with you. Schools make millions, and they have state-of-the-art facilities from the millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
I don't disagree with that, and I think that we need to give our college players some money back to it. I just think it has to be at a reasonable level as you do it, especially if you're talking mid-majors.
Absolutely. 100%.
When you get into the Big Ten and Big 12, my God, they're going to have to spend a whole bunch. But we can't be trying to extend ourselves so much that you're closing programs. And that's the concern I always have is programs are going to be hit by this. And it may not be this year, maybe next year. But this Johnson versus NCAA decision is going to impact every school. Throughout Division I, maybe impact Division II and Division III.
And Division III, yeah.
How is a Division III school going to actually pay its employees?
That's a really good question.
Excuse me.
That's a very good question, and I want to make this very clear. When you are getting to mid-major schools and when you're getting to Division II and Division III, for the most part, these schools do not make the same amount of money that these high-major and Power 5 schools make. So I fully understand that there is a difference between a school like Stony Brook who gets a budget for athletics and then has to get money from the state to fund athletics versus a Rutgers or a power school that the money they bring from athletics not only supports their athletics department but also subsidizes the school. So when I talk about players providing millions and millions of dollars of value to schools, I'm more talking about the power conferences. Now granted, I still think players in mid-major schools still provide lots and lots of money of value.
They do,
but
and they're a lot of fun to watch.
But
and I agree. I
unfortunately,
love watching them in majors, and I'm all there. But go ahead.
But unfortunately, it's just nowhere near the amount of money that these Power 5 schools
Of course they're
bring
not.
in.
And they're never going to be. The mid-majors are never going to be. Division II and Division III isn't. We saw Hartford go down, but let me tell you, everybody's going to have to start playing. If we're now having to pay players, we need to see every player is going to be at least paid minimum wage. Minimum wage is different throughout the country, but let's start thinking about that. Every player now gets a job, minimum wage, and gets a free scholarship. There is so much benefit for getting to be an athlete. It's your hard work is paying off, which is great, and they deserve it. But we have to figure out where that level is because we're not trying to make amateur sports professionals.
I agree. And also, we have to really think about the difference between football and basketball players and then sports like track and field, swimming, and all these other more niche sports that really don't bring in as much revenue as football and basketball. Because football and basketball, they make lots of money, but all these other sports, it's not really as much. In baseball, certain schools make a lot of money, certain schools don't. In track and field, there's very little money to be made other than students being represented at the Olympics.
Right, and I think that's the thing. I think this decision has lots of impact, but I think we're starting to do it. I think the last thing I want to mention about this is what's going on with unions. We now see that a union was formed at Dartmouth by men's basketball. And they're now setting the precedent for what's going on with college athletes. If we start seeing unions being developed with college athletes, not only at basketball, at football, at track and field, at swimming, at lacrosse, you're going to start seeing possibly even more power by the players. If that comes, we may be turning this all on its head, and I may be completely wrong. We may not be paying them minimum wage. we may be giving them packages like you were talking about with contracts and everything else. And I think there's some pros and cons there, and I'm concerned about it from the business side of athletics.
I think this will definitely lead to mid-majors being even more strapped for cash than they are now. But this really can lead to a shift in power and money from schools to players. You can see potential collective bargaining agreements. You could see potential people going out and going on strike for better wages. And look, for people watching this, I know some of you are for unions and some of you are against unions, but these are some of the consequences of unions. There's going to be more player representation. There could be more abilities for players to get paid, to get noticed, and maybe there can be some protections saying, like, enforcing that players can only practice 40 hours a week versus saying, we're going to have official practice 40 hours a week, but we're going to have unofficial practice that you better go to or else you're not going to play. And
that's crazy. How do you do that? And I've seen that so much where you say players got to be here 40 hours a week, but also not officially, you also have to be here another 5 hours a week doing other things to do it. Why?
It's because they're trying to get their athletes in the best shape possible, but it also means they are sacrificing on studying, on their education, on potential tests, on having a life outside of athletics, and I think that's unacceptable. I think when you are a student athlete, you recognize that there is sacrifice. Just like me being a band member at Stony Brook for the past 4 years, there was sacrifice that I made. I was not able to go and have fun during certain times of the day because I was practicing marching band. But it is incredibly unreasonable to say, okay, you're going to have to practice 40 hours a week, and that's your sacrifice. But then you hear, oh, you got to go practice more.
But that's what happens.
But that's ridiculous.
I know it's ridiculous, but it's what happens.
And this is something I think a union can fix as well.
And I think it can. And I think this is where we're going to see it. I would hate to see a strike in the middle of the basketball season, but what precedent's that? Are we going to be like COVID where games just canceled because Dartmouth men's basketball's on strike? And you're like, what? They're winning the league, but they just canceled because they're on strike? That's going to be so significant. And I think there's implications as we think about it. Not only this year, we're going to see this more and more.
Absolutely.
So I think this is really a great thing, and I think it's also had some bad things also with it.
This is going to cause lots and lots of change in athletics in America, not only from the college side, from the pro side, from high school, middle school, all the way down. This is going to have some massive implications.
It is. I agree. And I think this is where we need to think about this decision and it affects it. We'd love to hear your comments. Please leave the comments below. And also, please subscribe. This is Dave from Chalk Talk.
And I'm Josh.
Love to hear you and give your comments about this decision and what the impact is. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a good day.